This happened back in a magical, delicate age, when I still believed in Santa Claus. It was Christmas Eve night, or technically Christmas at that point. The time, I have no idea. All I know is it was late, and everyone in my house was probably asleep. I woke up randomly to what I don't know, but I was probably extremely thirsty. I had to get out of my bed and walk all the way downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of water. There were night lights on in the living room and kitchen, so I didn't have to turn on any lights to see where I was. I remember the house feeling unnaturally still. You know, that specific kind of silence that falls over a home when it's snowing outside. It's like the world is wrapped in cotton wool. Every creak of the floorboards under my small pajama-clad feet sounded like a gunshot. I was 7 years old, maybe 8, and my head was filled with sugar plums and the desperate hope for a Nintendo 64. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the glow from the Christmas tree in the living room cast these long, stretching shadows across the hallway. My dad was a stickler for tradition. He insisted on real trees Douglas firs that smelled of pine and winter. The scent was heavy in the air that night. I moved quietly, not because I was scared, but because I didn't want to get caught awake. My parents had told me the golden rule: if you're awake, Santa skips our house. I crept into the kitchen, the linoleum cold against my bare feet. I grabbed a plastic cup from the drying rack and filled it from the tap. The water was freezing perfect. I downed half of it in one go, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. That was when I heard it. It came from the living room. My heart did this frantic little flip in my chest. My first instinct wasn't fear, it was pure, unfiltered adrenaline. Santa. It had to be. I froze, holding my breath, straining my ears against the humming of the refrigerator. It sounded like heavy boots dragging across the hardwood floor. I knew I should run back upstairs, dive under my covers, and pretend to be asleep. But curiosity is a dangerous thing for a child. I set the cup down on the counter, making sure not to make a sound, and tiptoed toward the doorway that connected the kitchen to the living room. The living room was an L shape, so I could peek around the corner without being fully exposed. I pressed my back against the wall, inching my face forward just enough to see the tree. There was someone there. A figure was standing by the fireplace, backlit by the twinkling multicolored lights of the tree. He was tall, much taller than my dad, and broad. And to my absolute delight, he was wearing a suit. It looked red in the dim light. He had a large sack on the floor next to him. I felt a smile spreading across my face so wide it hurt. It was real. Everything the kids at school whispered about, everything the skeptics denied, it was all real. I watched as he knelt down. But then something made me pause. He wasn't taking presents out of the sack. He was putting things in. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. He reached out and grabbed the stocking hanging on the mantel, my sister's stocking, and stuffed the whole thing, candy and all, into his bag. Then he grabbed the silver candle holders my mom kept on the coffee table. Clink. Into the bag. Even at 7 years old, the logic didn't track. Santa brings toys. He doesn't take mom's decorations. The figure stood up and turned slightly, and the light from the tree hit him properly for the first time. The breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't the Santa from the Coca-Cola commercials. The suit was baggy and stained, with dark splotches that looked like oil or grease. The beard wasn't a majestic, snowy white flow. It looked like a fake, stringy cotton prop that was hanging halfway off his chin, held on by a visible elastic band. But it was the smell that hit me next, wafting into the kitchen. It wasn't cookies and milk. It was the smell of unwashed clothes, stale cigarettes, and something metallic like copper. My stomach dropped. The magical feeling evaporated instantly, replaced by a primal icy dread. I realized with clarity that this wasn't Santa Claus. This was a stranger. A dirty, large man was in our living room in the middle of the night, stealing our things. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were encased in concrete. I watched paralyzed as he moved away from the fireplace and toward the pile of presents my parents had already set out. He picked up a box wrapped in shiny gold paper and shook it. He ripped the paper off violently, not with the care of a jolly elf, but with the aggression of someone looking for cash. It was a sweater for my dad. He threw it on the floor with a disgusted grunt. He took a step backward, and his heavy boot crunched on a stray ornament. The sound was deafening. He froze. He didn't move a muscle. It was like he sensed a disturbance in the air. Slowly, agonizingly, slowly, his head turned toward the kitchen doorway. I pulled my head back instantly, pressing myself flat against the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought he'd hear it. Please don't come in here. Please don't come in here. Is someone there? The voice wasn't deep and jolly. It was raspy, wet, and whispered. I clamped my hands over my mouth. Tears were welling up in my eyes. I heard the heavy footsteps start to move. Not toward the front door, toward the kitchen. He was coming to check. I looked around frantically for a place to hide. The kitchen island, too open. The pantry, the door squeaked. Under the sink, it was full of cleaning supplies. The footsteps stopped right at the threshold of the kitchen. I could see the shadow of his boots stretching across the linoleum inches from where I stood pressed against the wall. I squeezed my eyes shut, preparing for a hand to grab me. "Hello, little one," the voice whispered closer this time. "I know you're awake." I didn't answer. I didn't breathe. Then the footsteps retreated. But they didn't go back to the tree. They went to the hallway. The hallway that led to the stairs. He wasn't leaving. He was going up to where my parents and my little sister were sleeping. The sound of his boots on the stairs was heavy, rhythmic, and deliberate. Every step he took felt like it was crushing my chest. I knew our staircase intimately. I knew that the third step from the top had a high-pitched whine if you stepped on the center of it. I waited, counting the thumps in the dark. 1, 2, 3. He was almost at the top landing. My paralysis broke. It wasn't bravery. I don't think an 8-year-old really understands bravery in the way adults do. It was panic. Pure animalistic panic. My little sister Ellie was 4 years old. Her room was the first door on the left at the top of the stairs. I pushed myself off the kitchen wall and sprinted to the bottom of the stairs. I didn't care about being quiet anymore, but my socks on the carpet muffles my approach naturally. I looked up. The figure in the dirty red suit was standing on the landing. The hallway light was off, but the ambient glow from the streetlights outside filtered through the window, casting him in a silhouette that looked monstrously wide. He wasn't looking down at me. He was facing Ellie's door. He reached out, a gloved hand, a glove that looked stiff with grime, and slowly gripped the brass doorknob. I scrambled up the stairs on all fours, my breath coming in jagged gasps. "Dad!" I screamed, but it came out as a strangled yelp. "Dad!" The figure stopped turning the knob. He didn't turn around to look at me. He just went still again, that same eerie, predator-like freezing reaction he had in the living room. I didn't stop. I threw myself past him, flattening my body against the opposite wall to avoid touching his coat, and burst into my parents' room at the end of the hall. "Dad, Mom, wake up." I was crying now, full, hysterical, sobbing. My dad, a heavy sleeper, groaned and rolled over. "What? Bud, go back to bed." "There's a man," I shrieked, grabbing his arm and shaking it violently. "There's a bad Santa. He's at Ellie's door." That got through. My mom sat up instantly, her maternal instinct overriding the sleep fog. "What did you say?" "A man in the hall." My dad sat up, rubbing his face, looking annoyed but confused. "If this is a nightmare, son, I swear." The sound of Ellie's bedroom door opening. It was unmistakable. It was a rusty hinge we kept meaning to oil. The annoyance vanished from my dad's face, replaced instantly by a look of cold, hard realization. He didn't say a word. He rolled out of bed, his feet hitting the floor with a thud. He reached under the bed. We didn't own a gun, my mom hated them, but my dad kept a heavy-duty Maglite flashlight and a wooden baseball bat from his college days within arm's reach. He grabbed the bat. "Stay here," he hissed at my mom. "Lock the door." "Bill," my mom whispered, her voice trembling. "Lock the door." My dad moved into the hallway, switching on the overhead light as he went. The sudden brightness was blinding. I peeked through the crack in the door, unable to look away. The hallway was empty. Ellie's door was wide open. "Hey!" my dad roared, his voice booming with a false bravado intended to scare an intruder. He raised the bat. "Get the hell out of my house." He rushed into Ellie's room. I held my breath, waiting for the sounds of a fight. Screams, crashes, anything. But there was only silence. Then my dad's voice, much softer, shaking. "Oh my God. Ellie." My mom pushed past me, ignoring the order to stay put, and ran into the room. I followed. The window in Ellie's room was shattered. Glass covered the pink carpet like jagged ice. The cold winter air was blasting into the room, billowing the curtains. My sister was sitting up in her bed, clutching her teddy bear, her eyes wide and staring at the window. She wasn't crying. She was just frozen. "He went out the window," my dad said, rushing to the jagged hole and looking down into the snowy yard. "I see him. He's running toward the woods." My mom scooped Ellie up, checking her for cuts, squeezing her so hard I thought Ellie might pop. "Did he touch you, baby? Did he touch you?" Ellie shook her head slowly. "He smelled like wet dog," she whispered. We called the police. They arrived within 10 minutes, blue and red lights flashing against the snow, creating a disco ball effect in our living room that felt sickeningly festive. They took statements. They took photos of the muddy boot prints that went from the fireplace to the kitchen, up the stairs, and into my sister's room. But the part that stays with me, the part that ruined Christmas forever, wasn't the break-in itself. It was what they found in the sack. In his haste to escape out the window, when he heard my dad yelling, the man had dropped the large sack he had been carrying. It was lying in the middle of Ellie's floor. An officer opened it on the living room floor while my parents gave their statements. I was sitting on the stairs watching. I expected to see the silver candle holders or the stolen presents. There were a few presents in there, sure, but mostly the bag was filled with other things. There was a roll of heavy-duty duct tape, a serrated hunting knife with a rusted handle, a pair of large metal zip ties, and a bottle of chloroform. The officer's face went pale. He looked at his partner, then at my parents, and quietly closed the bag. "Mr. and Mrs. Connect," the officer said, his voice grave. "You need to understand something. This wasn't a burglary." My dad looked at the bag, then at me and Ellie. I saw his face crumble. The realization hit him the same time it hit me. The man hadn't come to steal presents. He hadn't come to steal silver. He had come to take something else. If I hadn't woken up for a glass of water, if I hadn't screamed when I did, he would have had enough time. He was already opening the door. They never caught the guy. The footprints led into the dense woods behind our subdivision and vanished onto a main road a few miles away. For years, every Christmas Eve, I would lie awake, staring at my bedroom door, listening to the house settle. I don't worry about monsters under the bed or ghosts in the attic. I worry about the monsters that walk through the front door wearing a mask of something you love, carrying a bag that isn't meant for toys. This happened about 5 years ago, my first Christmas living alone in a new city. I had moved to Chicago for a job renting a garden-level apartment in a brownstone in a neighborhood that was up and coming. Realtors speak for mostly safe during the day, but don't walk around with headphones on. I'm a skeptic by nature. I don't believe in the supernatural, and I usually assume people have good intentions until they prove otherwise. That mindset almost got me killed. It was December 23rd. A blizzard had hit the city hard. The snow was piled 3 feet high on the sidewalks, and the temperature was hovering around 5 degrees below zero. The streets were empty. Even the constant hum of city traffic was muffled by the snow. I was in my living room, wrapped in a blanket, binge-watching The Office and drinking cheap wine. It was around 11:30 p.m. The buzzer to my apartment rang. It startled me, spilling a bit of wine on my sleeve. I wasn't expecting anyone. I didn't really know anyone in the city yet, aside from a few co-workers who had all flown home for the holidays. I walked over to the intercom by the door. "Hello, caroling. We're spreading Christmas cheer," a voice crackled through the speaker. It was high-pitched, cheerful, almost cartoonishly enthusiastic. It sounded like a group of people, maybe a choir. I frowned. At 11:30 at night, in a blizzard, thanks, but it's pretty late," I said, leaning against the wall. "Oh, come on, just one song. We're raising money for the homeless shelter on 5th, a different voice chimed in. This one was deeper, but still had that manic cheerfulness. I felt a twinge of guilt. It was freezing outside, and if they were actually out there collecting for the homeless, I was being a jerk. Plus, I had a jar of change and a few singles near the door. "All right, hang on," I said. I grabbed the cash and unlocked the heavy deadbolt. My apartment was slightly below street level, so my front door opened into a small gated concrete vestibule, and then there were stairs leading up to the sidewalk. I opened the door. The cold air hit me instantly, stinging my face. Standing at the top of the concrete stairs, looking down at me, were 4 people. 3 men and 1 woman. They were dressed in what looked like vintage Victorian caroling outfits, top hats, long scarves, thick wool coats. It was almost theatrical. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim street lamp light, the picture became unsettling. They weren't smiling. The voice on the intercom had been bubbly and bright. But the 4 people staring down at me were stone-faced. Blank. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on me. "Merry Christmas," the woman said. Her lips barely moved. The voice didn't match the tone I heard on the intercom. It was flat, monotone. "Merry Christmas," I replied, feeling a sudden urge to close the door. "Here's a donation. Stay warm." I reached out, intending to hand the money to the guy closest to the stairs. "We need to come inside to sing," one of the men said. He was huge, towering over the others. He took a step down the stairs. "No, that's okay," I said, taking a step back. "I'm actually about to go to bed. We need to come inside," the woman repeated. Same flat tone, same unblinking stare. The big man took another step down. Then, the others followed. They moved in unison like a single organism. Step, step, step. "Guys, stop," I said, my voice hardening. "I'm not letting you in. Take the money or leave." I tossed the cash onto the steps, trying to appease them while creating distance. They didn't even look at the money. They just kept looking at me. "We know you're alone," the third man said. That sentence sent a jolt of ice water through my veins deeper than the Chicago winter. "What?" I stammered. "We watched you come home," the woman said. "We watched the lights go out in the units above you. We know." They were halfway down the stairs now. They were blocking the only exit. The gate at the top of the stairs was latched behind them. I slammed the door shut and threw the deadbolt. My hands were shaking so bad I almost missed the lock. "Let us in," the voice screamed from the other side. It wasn't the monotone voice anymore. It was a guttural, angry roar. The door shook violently. They were throwing themselves against it. "Open the door. We just want to sing. We just want to sing." I backed away, grabbing my phone from the counter. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. 911. "What is your emergency?" "There are people trying to break into my apartment. 4 of them. They're at my door." I looked at the door. The wood frame around the deadbolt was splintering. They were kicking it. They weren't carolers. They were a pack of animals trying to get in. I realized with horror that my garden-level apartment had windows at street level. Windows that were covered only by flimsy blinds and standard glass. I heard the kicking stop at the front door. Silence for 2 seconds. Then a face pressed against the living room window. It was the woman. Her face was mashed against the glass, distorting her features. She was smiling now, a wide, rictus grin that showed too many teeth. She tapped on the glass. "We see you," she mouthed. Then, the man beside her raised a brick. The sound was deafening in the small apartment. The brick didn't just crack the window. It punched right through the glass and the cheap plastic blinds, landing with a heavy thud on my carpet. A blast of freezing wind and snow immediately swirled into the room, instantly dropping the temperature. I didn't scream. I didn't have enough air in my lungs to scream. I dropped the phone, scrambled to pick it up, and sprinted toward the back of the apartment where my bedroom and bathroom were. There inside, I yelled at the dispatcher. "They just broke the window. Get to a safe room," the operator said, her voice maddeningly calm. "Lock the door. Officers are 2 minutes out." 2 minutes. 2 minutes is an eternity when 4 strangers are climbing through your living room window. I ran into the bathroom. It was the only room with a lock on the door, flimsy as it was. I slammed it shut, twisted the little privacy lock, and then sat on the floor, bracing my feet against the door and my back against the tub. I turned off the lights. I wanted to be invisible. From the living room, I heard the sounds of boots crunching on broken glass. Where did he go? It was the deep voice, the big man. "He's shy," the woman giggled. It wasn't a nervous giggle, it was a high manic sound that made my skin crawl. Come out, wherever you are." Then they started singing again. Silent Night. Holy Night. But they weren't singing it normally. They were screaming the lyrics, screaming them at the top of their lungs, discordant and angry, while tearing my apartment apart. I heard my TV being tipped over. I heard plates being swept off the kitchen counter. All is calm. All is bright. They were moving closer. I could hear their heavy footsteps in the hallway. They were checking the bedroom. I heard my mattress being flipped over. "He's not in here," one of the men said. "Check the bathroom," the woman sang, elongating the word. My breath hitched. I pressed my legs harder against the door, my muscles trembling so violently I thought I'd cramp. I gripped the phone, tears streaming down my face in the dark. "Please hurry," I whispered to the operator. "They're at the door." The doorknob jiggled. "Occupied," the deep voice roared from the other side, followed by a heavy slam of a shoulder against the wood. The door bowed inward. The cheap wood cracked near the frame. I let out a sob, unable to hold it back. "I hear you," the woman whispered, her face pressing against the crack in the doorframe. I couldn't see her, but I could feel her breath through the splintered wood. "We just want to give you your present." Another hit. The lock mechanism whined. One more hit and the door would give way. I looked around the bathroom for a weapon. A plunger. A bottle of shampoo. Nothing. I was going to die in my bathroom, huddled in the dark, while people in Victorian costumes sang Christmas carols. Then faint, but growing louder sirens. The pounding on the door stopped instantly. "Cops?" one of the men hissed. "We have time," the deep voice growled. "No, look, blue lights." The chaotic energy in the hallway shifted to panic. I heard them scrambling back toward the living room. "Leaving so soon," the woman yelled, her voice sounding far away now. "Merry Christmas." I heard the crunch of glass again, then the sound of them climbing back out the window. I stayed pressed against the door, sobbing, listening to the sirens get louder and louder until they cut off right outside my building. It took the police 5 minutes to convince me to open the bathroom door. When I finally did, my apartment looked like a war zone. The tree was tipped over ornaments, crushed into the carpet. The TV was smashed. The furniture was slashed open. But it was what they did to the walls that made the responding officer tell me to go wait in the ambulance. Written on the walls in red lipstick they had found in my ex-girlfriend's box of stuff I hadn't unpacked were lyrics. "He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake." And in the kitchen on the counter they had left the present they mentioned. It wasn't a box. It was a single dead rat dressed in a tiny crude Santa outfit made of red felt. Tied around its neck was a Polaroid photo. The police officer picked it up with a gloved hand and showed it to me, asking if I recognized the location. I threw up. The photo was taken from outside my bedroom window. It was a picture of me sleeping, taken just a few nights prior. The date stamp on the photo was from December 20th. They hadn't just picked my house at random that night. They had been watching me for days. They had been in my backyard. They had been planning this. They never caught the carolers. The police found their costumes dumped in a dumpster 3 blocks away. They were stolen from a local theater group. To this day, I don't answer my door after dark. And if I hear Christmas carols, I don't feel joy. I feel a cold, hard knot in my stomach, and I check the locks. This happened when I was 19 during my first year of community college. Like most broke students, I worked retail. Specifically, I worked at a massive department store in one of those sprawling malls in Ohio, the kind with long, echoing hallways and no windows where you can lose track of time completely. It was Christmas Eve. If you've ever worked retail, you already know that Christmas Eve is hell. From the moment we opened, the store was chaos. Screaming kids, parents snapping at cashiers, clothes ripped off racks and tossed onto the floor like people expected them to magically fold themselves back up. By the time the mall announced it was closing at 6:00 p.m., my entire body felt numb. My feet ached. My head pounded. I had been listening to the same Christmas songs on loop for 8 straight hours, and I felt like I might lose my mind if I heard one more sleigh bell. I was folding jeans when my manager Rick came up behind me. Rick was the kind of guy who treated retail like a military operation. Clipboard always in hand, shirt always tucked in too tightly, power tripping over people making minimum wage. He tapped my shoulder. "Before you clock out, I need you to sweep the fitting rooms," he said, not even looking at me. "Then take the trash to the compactor." I stared at him. "You're serious," I said. "It's Christmas Eve." He finally looked up. Double time pay. That shut me up. I sighed, grabbed the rolling trash bin, and headed toward the fitting rooms. By the time I finished, the store was almost empty. The metal shutters had rolled down over the entrances, muting the outside world. The music cut off abruptly, leaving behind only the thin, high-pitched hum of the overhead lights. Without customers, the store felt wrong. Too big, too quiet. I pushed the trash bin through the swinging doors into the stockroom. The stockroom was enormous rows of metal shelving stacked high with boxes stretching back farther than you could see. Motion sensor lights flickered on as I walked, illuminating narrow paths through the inventory. To get to the trash compactor, you had to pass through the stockroom and then exit into the mall's service corridors. Most customers never even realize those corridors exist. They're long, concrete hallways that run behind the stores, painted a dull gray and filled with pipes, electrical boxes, and exposed wiring. They smell like dust, wet cardboard, and old garbage. Every sound echoes. I was halfway through the stockroom when I heard it. Jingle. I stopped pushing the bin. The sound came again. Jingle. It sounded like sleigh bells. My stomach tightened. The sound came from the back corner of the stockroom where we stored old mannequins. Employees called it the graveyard. Broken torsos, detached arms, bald plastic heads staring at nothing. "Rick," I called out. "This isn't funny." No answer. Just silence. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the HVAC system. Maybe a rat hitting something metal. I started walking again faster this time. I reached the heavy steel door leading into the service corridor, punched in the code, and shoved it open. The hallway beyond was empty. Long, narrow, lit by flickering yellow lights that buzzed softly overhead. I pushed the trash bin toward the compactor bay, about 50 yards down. As I walked, I passed the locked back doors of other stores. A toy store, a candle shop. Then I reached the door labeled Santa's Village, staff only. It was cracked open, light spilled out onto the concrete floor. I slowed down without realizing I was doing it. And then I heard a voice. Low, quiet, rhythmic, naughty, nice. Naughty, nice. I froze. The voice didn't sound like someone talking on the phone. It sounded like chanting. Bone. Blood. Naughty. Every instinct in my body told me to keep walking. Instead, I pushed the trash bin against the wall and crept toward the door. I looked through the crack. Inside the small break room, sitting with his back to me, was the mall Santa. He was still in full costume, red coat, black boots, the white beard, but the wig was off, revealing a bald, sweaty head spotted with age. He was hunched over a table, moving frantically. On the table was a porcelain doll. I watched as he raised a hammer and brought it down. The doll shattered. Before I could react, he picked up a sharp shard of porcelain and pressed it against his own cheek, dragging it down slowly. I gasped. The Santa stopped moving. He didn't turn around. "I hear a little mouse," he whispered. My heart slammed against my ribs. I backed away, every muscle screaming at me to run. And that's when I looked down the hallway behind me. Someone was standing there. An elf. A grown man in a green velvet costume, tall and broad, leaning casually against the wall. He held a length of silver tinsel stretched tight between his gloved hands. Snap, snap. He smiled. His teeth were filed into points. "No peeking," he said. Behind me, the Santa's door creaked open. I was trapped. I stood there in the service corridor, my brain refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. To my left, the Santa stepped fully out of the break room. Blood streaked down his cheek where he had carved into his own skin, soaking into the white beard. He held the hammer loosely, like it was an extension of his arm. To my right, the elf straightened up from the wall. The bells on his curled shoes jingled softly as he shifted his weight. He pulled the tinsel wire tighter between his hands, testing it. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, like the concrete walls were slowly closing in. "Naughty," the Santa rasped, taking a step toward me. The elf took one too. I had nowhere to go. Behind me was the compactor bay, a dead end. Ahead of me was the elf blocking the path back to my store. The only thing between us was the industrial trash bin I had been pushing moments earlier. My heart was beating so fast it felt painful. The logical part of my brain, the part that cared about finals and rent and getting home for Christmas, completely shut down. All that was left was instinct. The elf moved first. He took a slow step toward me, the bells on his shoes jingling with every movement. "Come here, toy," he said softly, tightening the wire. "Don't make this messy." Behind me, the Santa slapped the hammer into his palm. Thwack, thwack. "We're already behind schedule," he muttered. "The sleigh's waiting." They were closing in. I grabbed the handle of the trash bin. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I screamed. It was raw, an animal ripping out of my throat as I threw my entire body forward, shoving the bin straight at the elf. The wheels rolled smoothly, too smoothly. The bin slammed into his stomach with a hollow, sickening thud. His grin vanished instantly. The air rushed out of him in a wheeze as he stumbled backward, tripping over his own curled shoes and crashing onto the concrete. The tinsel wire skittered across the floor. "Run," my brain screamed. I didn't hesitate. I leapt over him and sprinted down the corridor toward my store. Behind me, the Santa roared, "Get him!" I heard heavy boots pounding against the concrete, faster than they should have been. I could hear the hammer slicing through the air behind me with every stride. I reached the steel door to my store and slammed my shaking fingers onto the keypad. I missed the second number. A red light flashed. I turned. The Santa was charging straight at me 20 feet away, hammer raised high. His face was twisted with rage, blood smeared into the fake beard. I didn't have time. I bolted past my store and ran deeper into the service corridors. "You can't leave the workshop," the Santa screamed, his voice echoing unnaturally. My lungs burned as I ran. I knew the layout of the mall just enough to be dangerous. Somewhere ahead were double doors that led into the main concourse near the food court. I pushed harder. The footsteps behind me never slowed. I burst through the double doors and stumbled onto the tiled floor of the mall. The contrast was horrifying. The mall was dark and cavernous, lit only by blue-tinted skylights and the glow of massive Christmas decorations hanging overhead. The fountains were off. The storefronts were shuttered. It felt like a tomb. "Help!" I screamed. "Security, call the police." My voice echoed uselessly. Then the doors behind me flew open. The Santa stepped into the mall, panting heavily, scanning the darkness. I dove behind a small kiosk selling phone cases, crouching low. I watched through the plastic displays as the elf limped out after him, clutching his ribs. His face was twisted with anger now. He reached into his pocket and flicked open a switchblade. "Check the castle," the elf hissed. He probably ran to Daddy. They started toward the massive Santa setup in the center court. I wasn't in the castle. I needed help. I needed noise. That's when I remembered the fire alarm. It was mounted on the wall near the restrooms out in the open. I waited until their backs were turned, then moved. Every step felt impossibly loud. I reached the wall and lifted my hand toward the red lever. Click. A loose tile under my foot betrayed me. The Santa froze. Slowly, he turned his head. Our eyes met. A smile spread across his bloody face. "Found you," he mouthed. They both charged. I yanked the fire alarm. The mall exploded into chaos. Sirens wailed. Strobe lights flashed blinding white. The noise was so loud it rattled my teeth. The Santa staggered, disoriented. That second was enough. I ran into the men's restroom and slammed the heavy door shut, throwing the deadbolt. The hammer smashed into the wood. "Open up," the Santa screamed. "Santa's got a gift for you." The door splintered. I looked around frantically and saw the vent above the toilets. I climbed onto the tank, slipping on porcelain, clawing at the rusted screws until the cover popped free. The door burst open. The Santa charged. I hauled myself into the vent just as his hand grabbed my ankle. I kicked wildly, my heel connecting with his face. The grip loosened. I pulled myself into the darkness as the hammer shattered the toilet below me. I crawled. Blind. Panicked. Bleeding. Eventually I kicked out a grate and fell straight into the security office. Guards screamed. Monitors flickered. On one screen I saw them running toward an emergency exit, abandoning the mall. Police arrived within minutes. They found the real Santa and his helper alive, bound in a locker room. The men who chased me were never caught. I quit the next day. Months later, I got a letter with no return address. Inside was a Polaroid. It showed me running to my car. On the back, written in red ink, "See you next year." I moved states, changed my name, and every Christmas, when I hear sleigh bells, I look for the nearest exit.